Right, we are on we're on the 12th part now of the talks that I've been giving on paradise or heaven. And we're also on the 26th day of the Rabi' al-Awwal. And in the Rabi' al-Awwal I've been looking at the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ, memorizing it all the way back to Adnan. And also we've been focusing on his the habit of people in Rabi' al-Awwal, all go by going through the Shama'il of the Prophet ﷺ, is in the last few days of Rabi' al-Awwal, so we've only got 4 days left, is they look at how can we connect to the Prophet ﷺ. And so throughout Rabi' al-Awwal I've been talking about memorizing the lineage of the Prophet ﷺ. That's one way. And then another exercise is, I said, was appreciating what he's done in your actual daily life. Little things he's taught you that have made an impact in your life. And that way you find a connection and a greater appreciation of him in your life. And another thing is what they do in the end of the Shama'il is they look at, first and foremost, the passing away of the Prophet ﷺ. They look at that. And because the Prophet ﷺ wasn't just born in Rabi' al-Awwal, on the 12th of Rabi' al-Awwal, he was also passed away on the 12th of Rabi' al-Awwal, on a Monday. And then focusing on his role in the next life. And so we have a hadith where Abu Hurairah relates that the Prophet ﷺ went out to Baqi' one night, and Abu Hurairah was with him, radiallahu anhu, and the Prophet ﷺ made dua for the people of Baqi', the graveyard there, and then he started yearning for his brothers. It's a famous hadith. He says, my brothers, and then Abu Hurairah says, your brothers, aren't we your brothers? And he says, no, you're not my brothers, you are my... What do we call the people around the Prophet ﷺ? Sahaba. Yeah, you are my Sahaba. And he says, as for my brothers, my ikhwan, he says, there are people who believe in me but don't see me. And so, and then the Prophet ﷺ speaks about these, and he speaks about the description of the hold. And the hold is this pool that the Prophet ﷺ, he will have when people come from the grave on the day of resurrection. There will be a pool. There's a weak narration that says all the prophets will actually have pools that they will call their people to, and they will boast about, oh look how many people I've got drinking from my pool. Okay, and the Prophet ﷺ, obviously his pool will be the largest. So we definitely know that on the Day of Judgment the Prophet ﷺ will have a pool. And as for the other prophets, there's weaker narrations, but they're not as authentic. And then Abu Hurairah says, okay, your brothers, you're going to see them on the Day of Judgment. He says, yes. He says, how on earth are you going to recognize them? And the Prophet ﷺ says, you know when you see a large group of horses running towards you, and you see horses dark in colour, and then you see some horses that have these white spots on their feet and on their forehead, would you notice them from amongst the herd of horses? Is it herd you call a set of horses? A pack of horses, I don't know. And he says, would you notice the difference between those and he says, of course I would. He went, that's how I will notice my followers on the Day of Judgment, because they will have white spots on their foreheads, and they have white spots on their, or glowing marks on their foreheads and glowing marks on their limbs. From what? Yeah, from wudu. He says, I'll recognise them. Those people who persist in performing wudu, even in difficult times, and for performing the prayer. Because prayers, I've noticed that my friend he was a youngster once, and he says, you know, as a kid, prayer, I had no issue with prayer. He said it was wudu. He says, oh, I have to get up. I've got to wash myself. Oh, I don't want to get wet. And so this is a reminder that on the Day of Judgment, you're there, but you'll think, thank goodness I did wudu on that day, okay? Because I'm getting some light here now, guys. And so the Prophet ﷺ will recognise us by them. Then he says the people will come to the hold, this pool. And so we're speaking paradise, and you're saying, why are you talking about the day of resurrection? Because this is an important point. The Prophet ﷺ has these two. He has a hold, a pool, collected water, and then he has a nahar, a river. And the river is in paradise, and the pool is on the Day of Standing. And they're both called what? Yeah, exactly. They're both called Kawthar. The Prophet ﷺ, one day, he was amongst his companions and he just fell slightly asleep. And his head basically sank. It dropped. And then he looked up smiling. And the Sahaba said, "Why are you smiling?" And they said, "The reason I'm smiling is because Allah just revealed a verse, surah to me." What surah is that? Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar. فَصَلِّ لِرَبِّكَ وَانْحَرْ إِنَّ شَانِئَكَ وَالْأَبْتَرِ. And he explained that Kawthar is a pool that he will have on the day of on the day of standing, the people will drink from, and a river in paradise. So he clarifies it's both. So this pool that the people will have on the day of judgment, it said it's got, obviously a pool has ends to it, edges to it. So he says those edges will be a month's travel, as far as someone can travel a month on horseback. So imagine it, if you're on a horse and you're travelling for a month non-stop, that's quite a long journey. And so that's how big the pool is. And then he says the water that the people will drink from, the people will come to drink, and the water will be of the colour of milk and the sweetness of honey. And on the banks around the river, there will be vessels made of gold and silver that the people will drink from, and those vessels will be as vast in number as there are stars in the sky. And so a good act to do is to go out in the sky when you can see the stars. A bit difficult in the cities sometimes, but to go out and just think, wow, there's a lot of stars out there, and just think on the Day of Judgment that more than that number of stars will have vessels around the pool for people to drink from, because obviously people will be coming from the grave, and after maybe a few hundred, maybe 1,000 years of not having a drink, people will be very, very thirsty. And so people will rush to there, gasping for drink, and the Prophet ﷺ will quench their thirst. He says, whoever drinks from it, he will never thirst ever and ever again. But some people, the Prophet ﷺ will beckon forward, but angels will snatch them and pull them away from the pool. And the Prophet ﷺ will say, why are you taking these people away from me? These are my people, these are my people. He says, they're not your people. They did things after you that they did things after you that weren't becoming of your sunnah. They basically turned away from your practice. And so the Prophet ﷺ says, move up, get away from me. And so this is a proof that, because there's a difference of opinion. Some people say that pool will be actually when the people come out of the grave, before they cross over the bridge. Some people say it will be before that. Other people say the pool that the Prophet ﷺ will drink, the people will drink from, is after the bridge, before they go into paradise. But this hadith is a stronger proof that the pool will actually be before the bridge. And by this pool will be two chutes. Is that what you call them? A mizab, basically, which is, the chute, the Kaaba. It's got the mizab, if you've seen it. It floats where the water flow goes over. I don't know what you call them, like a drainage or chute. And so there will be two chutes that come into the pool that feed the pool with water. And those chutes, their source is the river in paradise. So that explains why they're both called Kawthar, because their source of water is actually the Kawthar. What does Kawthar mean? It means to be plentiful. It means to be very vast. And so the scholars, when they says, we gave you the Kawthar, in the A'taynak al-Kawthar, what does that mean? Some scholars said it just means we've given you such abundant good, such greatness. And others said, no, this hadith states clearly that this is a river, that the Prophet ﷺ, a pool that the people will drink from on the Day of Judgment, and a river that the people will have in paradise. And so that's what we're looking at today. We're looking at the rivers of paradise. And rivers are very, very relevant if you think about it. When in ancient civilizations, one of the most important things was a river source. So people would find a river. If you think about it, in India, even in traditional societies, rivers were sacred. We had in India, you've got the river Ganges, isn't it? Is it a river? It's actually it's more of like a sea, isn't it? But water was incredibly holy. Why? Because it was seen as a source of life. Not only that, a river is a metaphor for your life as if you're flowing down, like someone on a canoe. Okay, once when I was in the Ardèche of France, it's one of my favourite holidays I ever went on. I was a kid, we had a school holiday, and we went to the Ardèche in France, which is in the south of France, and we had a canoeing trip. But for 2 days, we were in these canoes, 2 of us paddling, and we had to put our clothes and all our possessions in these barrels and put them on the thing, and we're just canoeing out to sleep on the beach on the side of the banks, and it was amazing. We're just on these rivers, and you really feel like the flow. As you're flowing by, you're just seeing all this different scenery. I was only about 12, I think, but it's I still remember that vividly. And so the river is like it's carrying you through life. So it's a source of life, because a society can't survive without it. Also, it's an image of you flowing through life, and that sometimes you go through rocky waters. Sometimes if you notice it, the canoe sometimes goes through choppy waters. Then it goes through, it's settled. And this is a bit of an analogy for life. It's basically, in life, you're going to have choppy times, and you're going to have times when, nothing's really happening, and so forth and so forth, and things and obstacles are going to be in front of you in your journey as well. Life is not, we want life just to be a nice flow all the time, okay? But that's not the reality of life. But it's how we deal with those actual choppy waters. And what we do when everything's going all right. Do we just do we actually sit there and take it in, or do we just pick our nose and just think, I'm bored, and so forth? How do you deal with these different stages of your flow of your life? But not only that, another thing that's very interesting about the rivers is there's generally a symbolism of there's always an image of a tree as well. And that's why when the Prophet ﷺ, when he went on the night journey and he visited it, he went into the garden, what did he see? He saw the Sidratul Muntaha, the Lote Tree of furthest knowledge. And so, what did he see, the Prophet ﷺ, underneath this amazingly huge tree? It said its roots were in the 6th heaven, and its branches went right up to the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, going into the 7th heaven. So, and what did the Prophet ﷺ see underneath the Lote Tree? He saw 4 rivers, and some say that the Kawthar itself was actually the source of those 4. The 4 of those was the Nile and the Euphrates, the Nile and the Furat, and the Sihan and the Jihan. He says, I saw 2 rivers that were apparent, that were coming out of the tree at the bottom of its roots. And I saw another 2 rivers that were less apparent. They were hidden. So he said there was a Naharan al-Zahiran. There was 2 apparent rivers, and there was 2 hidden rivers. He says the 2 apparent rivers were the Nile and the Euphrates. He said the 2 hidden were the Sihan and the Jihan. Now, what's really interesting about this is that obviously the Nile and the Euphrates, we know these. And the scholar says, what does this really mean? How can the Prophet ﷺ see the Nile and the Euphrates in paradise? Does that mean the source of the Nile and the Euphrates, if we were to dig a bit and find the source of the Nile and Euphrates, that we'd find the Lote Tree of furthest knowledge there? Okay, so there's this whole debate about this. And they said, some of the scholars said, well, what it means is that maybe originally the Nile and the Euphrates were from paradise and they were brought down to earth. That's one possibility. Another says, no, what it means maybe is that they will be taken up to paradise. Okay, just like the Prophet ﷺ, his Rawda, his mosque, this area that's so blessed, he says my Rawda is part of paradise. Some of the scholars meant what that means is, does that mean literally when I'm in his mosque, I'm praying and I'm in paradise? Or does that mean that that this will be taken up and it will be part of paradise? Or does it just mean it's very, very blessed? And this was the third position, that basically all it means is that these rivers were incredibly blessed. Why? And we can see this. Historically, the Nile and the Euphrates were the seats of civilization. If you think about Egypt, these were the real beds of civilization historically in the classical period. We've got Egypt, and then we've got the Fertile Crescent, Iraq and Iran, and then into Jordan and this area. And so the Euphrates was incredibly relevant. And so the scholars differ about that. Now, what about this Sihan and Jihan? Interestingly, in the Bible, they mention these as well in Genesis. We've got they call it, if I get my name right, the Gihon, or Jihon, I don't know how you pronounce it, and then the Piston as well. And so some say it's these two rivers. They don't know where their sources are. And it's interesting that the Prophet ﷺ said they were bathed in urn, they were hidden, they weren't apparent. So we don't know these rivers. Are they rivers on this earth as well, represented on this earth? Or are they rivers that are just exclusively for paradise? Okay, but what we do see here is that we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created everything from water and then stems from it life. And tree is a symbol of life. Why? Because we start as something very simple, a seed. And then from that seed, this thing that you can put in your finger and think, what's this, nothing special? It becomes this absolutely huge tree. And this tree starts rooted in the ground, but its branches reach right up. Okay, the longer and the older it gets, the taller and higher its branches reach. And so that's a symbol for knowledge and wisdom, because the human being, as he grows, but being rooted by his body, but his soul grows and wishes to reach up to the heavens. And so the Lote Tree is a perfect symbol of that. And so the Lote Tree is an expression of as far as we can reach, and that's why it's called the Lote Tree of furthest knowledge. It's a symbol for that. And it's in paradise and it reaches out. And so he says the Kawthar is the main river over which, yes. So the Prophet ﷺ said when he was in paradise, he saw Kawthar. And he said Kawthar was a river that upon it was a palace of ruby and emerald. So that's something specific about the Kawthar in paradise. The Prophet ﷺ said its soil was the smell of pure musk, and its waters were of milk. Again, same description as the pool, okay, of milk, and its banks were pearl and ruby, he says. And he says, and birds would come down to the Kawthar and drink from it, and their necks were the size of camels' necks. And so these are pretty big birds. When Umar heard about this, he went, my God. He says, how big are these birds? He says, these are wondrous birds. And the Prophet ﷺ smiled at him. He said, they're tastier than they look. He said basically to him. He said, so you get to eat these huge birds of paradise that have necks the size of camels. So you can imagine how big these actual animals are. And they come down and they bend their necks down and drink from the rivers of the Kawthar. He said, and now, what's interesting, where does the Kawthar stem from? There's a bit of a debate that seems to be ambiguous. Some say that the Kawthar is a source of all waters, as we said, of the paradise, and it actually pours down from the throne of the All-Merciful. Okay, and so it's the sources. So if we imagine paradise is very, as I've been speaking to you in other classes, lectures about this, is that the highest point of paradise is actually the largest point of paradise, which is really strange, because it's like a pyramid upside down then, if you can imagine it. Because if the lowest part is the smallest and the largest, because the center of paradise, the tallest part is the central point. And so basically it's like this, like a pyramid, like a big hill, but the top is largest. And so it's like on its head. And so the Prophet ﷺ will be there, and the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be above him. And so this analogy we get, this image we get here is of these waters pouring down upon him. And then the Prophet ﷺ allows those waters to pass into everyone's gardens. And so this is the image we get of the gardens of paradise. And Allah says they pass through underneath our lands. Okay, but what's really unique about they say the actual waters of paradise, they don't have, like, what would you call it, a bed. They flow across the land. And the only image I can get of that, do you remember when you were kids, we used to get like plastic sheets and put them down and put a hose pipe? Did you used to do this as kids? I don't know if ever you did that. And you'd run and go fly, like basically skid down there, so you'd go, wow, like that. Yeah, have you ever done that? No. Basically, that's the only image I can get. Is these rivers are basically just flowing across the grounds of the paradise. And Allah describes them, as everyone's familiar with the verses, isn't it? تَجْرِي مِن تَحْتِهَا anhar, jannat, these gardens, tajri. Now it's really beautiful. Allah does this. He says jannat. So he talks about these gardens, and jannah means something that covers. So it's these luscious groves that you can't see out of. Such thick foliage that you can't even see out of them. So you're just chilling. You don't need to put a fence around your garden because the foliage is so thick that basically no one can get a little peep through. And so you're all protected there, all your secrecy, all your privacy. And so he says, these are jannat, these groves. Then he says, tajri, flowing. Tajri min tahtiha, from beneath them, the gardens, yeah, al-anhar, the rivers. So you get this idea as if the actions being mentioned before the actual, you see them. So as if you're in your garden and you go, oh, what's that sound? Okay, and we know that, I don't know about you, but when I hear the flow of water, I find it very therapeutic. So you can get this idea, this sound, and it just makes me feel chilled out when I hear that. And it's even better when you stand underneath. You know, when you stand underneath a waterfall and you just go, ah. And so, and also we know that the flowing water, I don't know how authentic the hadith is, but there's a saying that the Prophet ﷺ said, if you want to enhance your eyesight, it's by looking at greenery and looking at flowing water. It actually stimulates the eye. And so so we hear it, tajri, and then we look, and then when we hear it, we're trying to locate it, aren't we? If you hear something, you want to locate it. And where's it located? Min tahtiha, below. So you're hearing it from below. And then you see al-anhar, the rivers. Okay? And it's really weird that Allah says this, because we translate it as gardens flowing underneath them, rivers. But Allah uses an al here, which is an al means the rivers. So what's this the mean? And al in Arabic has many, many meanings. One of the meanings could mean the ultimate rivers. Okay, the ultimate rivers beyond that you can imagine. That's what you're going to see. So these flowing, and so these rivers are basically flowing from the throne of Allah, from the Prophet ﷺ. Then he's channeling them down to all people's gardens, and then we have the 4 rivers of paradise. These 4 rivers, which are named the Nile. They're just given that name, not necessarily that they have any link to the Nile here, but the Nile and the Euphrates and the Sihan and the Dihan. These are the 4 rivers of paradise. And as they go through, it says, but there's other hadith that say there's actually 4 seas in paradise. They say bahar. Now, what's bahar mean here? It could just mean absolutely huge collections of water, Allah knows best. And from them the rivers break forth. And so is it that from the throne of Allah, this is my thinking, the throne from Allah, these waters come down, create these massive pools of water, and there's 4 of them, one creating water, one that's made of, what the rivers of paradise made from? One from water, one from milk, one from honey, and one from wine. Yeah, it's all right, you can say it. So, but this wine is a different wine. It's not the wine, it's the wine that makes you happy, but it doesn't make you come down. It's not a wine that clouds your mind from the reality around you. It actually enhances the stimulation of paradise. And so, these are flowing through, and they come from these 4. And so, it says they run across the ground, and as they do, they create more. They turn up the soil, which produces more musk, pure musk coming from the paradise, and and it creates these banks alongside it that are made of pearl and ruby. And then there's one more river. Okay, there's one more river that's called the Bariq. This river, which Bariq literally means baraka, means lightning. Okay. This is where we get the word buraq from. It says there's a river in front of the gates of paradise, and this river, the Bariq, it's the river specifically for the martyrs, those people who strove and sacrificed their lives for the sake of the religion. When they are in their graves, their souls will go to this river and drink from it, and when they're drinking from this river, food is brought out from paradise for them in the mornings and the afternoons. This is another river from the rivers of paradise. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha